everybody get it? Let me just start by saying, at the meeting last month, I went back and watched the video, and that meeting was not really well organized. People kept talking out of turn. I'd like to keep this one more organized if we can. And there was one thing that I want to address. Some of you thought that the meeting we were having last month, when I announced having a workshop, I said citizens workshop, which is not something usually city council does. They just have a workshop and city council works on something. And of course, they're always public meetings and they're open to everybody. Can you not hear me, Richard? Do I need to pull it down so I can read my lips?
That's better.
Okay. So we're 6 feet, right?
Okay.
So I just want to clear up one thing. So when I announced we're going to do a workshop, I said citizens workshop. The idea was for us to do nothing with this ordinance, sit down with those of y'all that were unhappy with it, and then go through and tweak it and make changes. But I think y'all thought that we were going to revise it first and then bring it to you. So that's what we've done for this meeting. Tim has went through and he's made some changes. We've passed you out a new copy of a new proposed ordinance. So my question is, do you want to read this thing out loud, or do you just want to read it over and see if you have any suggestions, or see what you think? I don't know. He's taken a lot of the language out about
really all I changed was the inoperable vehicle. I took out a lot of the qualifiers. Basically what this says is motor's got to be operable, all the major components have to be there, and it's got to be licensed.
Yeah, and
That's
the only thing that's changed is section 50405, which was related to the vehicles. Is that on what you put together?
right.
Yeah. And so what I would suggest is, if this is what everyone wants to go with, is basically an ordinance amending only that section of the code. And so it'd be a lot shorter and a lot more, because that way you're not bringing everything into it. So
It doesn't.
wish I'd been a little quicker to get stuff done, but basically before I take the meeting, I did put together an ordinance that would be just that section on the vehicles. I know Tim made a couple of tweaks since then, but so I can pass this around if y'all want to see it, but it just took what he did and just moved it to just the vehicles, and I did clean up a little language where it wasn't artful as it could have been anyway, but.
I took out the 3 days you got to move your vehicle, and 2 or more flat tires, or the wheels are missing. I mean, that's really covered in one sentence. It's got to be street legal. It's got to be able to go out on the highway. So that covers all that. And the motor's got to be, you got to be able to start it up and drive it. It's got to be licensed. So doesn't matter how long it sits there, as long as it's not an inoperable vehicle.
Yeah. And I will say, since the last meeting, I have had, I think, 4 people come see me about this. One of them just wanted to know what it was about, and I went through it with him, and he was okay. The other 3 were very adamant that we needed a nuisance ordinance, that they wanted the stuff cleaned up on the hill. And up on the hill is where they're talking about the most.
Yeah.
So, I didn't have anybody come in and fuss at me about us having the ordinance. It was fussing at me that we were thinking about changing it or maybe doing away with it. I said, well, we're not doing away with it. We're going to make a few changes to it. But so, I don't know.
What
Anybody else?
What hill are you talking about?
School Hill up there.
School Hill.
Yeah. And they've already, there's been some stuff cleaned up there already, right?
Oh yeah, several places.
Have you had anybody contact you?
I've had several up on the hill contact me wanting.
But has anybody, city council people, had anybody contact you
Not since
fussing about?
not since the last meeting. Nobody has contacted me about having the ordinance or
Well, that's my area up there, and I've had quite a few people contact me wanting stuff cleaned up.
Yeah.
I had a family member that came in, and I was thinking about this the other day when we were talking, and I was talking about how, we need to be safe, we need to be healthy, we need to have, beautify our city. And that's all things that's a property of life. I mean, that's pursuit of happiness. I mean, it's not just talking about this nuisance ordinance, it's talking about how we can make our city freer and people traveling through. And somebody said, I think it was my neighbor, he said, So we're just gonna do this just because, people are traveling through to the city, and that's all this is about, you know, like traveling through a third ways with the highway. And I didn't address him the way that I wanted to. I was like, why would, if our main highway, Highway 65, is ugly, and we can't keep our tenants mowed, we can't keep our residents' houses nice and neat, why would they want to venture off into our side streets and go in our neighborhood and want to live here? They don't want to travel through here. Well, that's the way I should have addressed that. And that's what I think it should be. I mean, I had a family member come see me from Indiana, and he was just appalled. He was like, hey, Dayla, what is this? What's the city doing about this? And I was like, it was embarrassing. How can you let trash go on top of this truck like that? Why aren't they doing something about it? It's kind of a joke because everybody was laughing, like, Mom's on that committee. And I was like, that particular property is not in the city. And yes, I know it looks ugly coming into our neighborhood.
There's one over there.
Yeah. And how can they allow that? And he was kept going on about how nasty it was, and varmints, and then the next thing was, well, don't y'all have skunks here, and don't you have a raccoon, and, you know, and things that we've all been talking about in our animal control. I mean, all of this plays into it. It's not just about how our grass needs to be cut.
I remember back when you and I first got on the city council, we made them tear down these old houses. Was about to fall in, and we made them tear down several around here now. I see a few down here now that needs it.
Adam, you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to interrupt you, but I was going to talk about the ordinance.
Okay.
50401, by the way, I appreciate you going over that, but I don't want to start on that silly automotive part of it. We did that thing ad nauseum last week, month. 50401 C18. I want to make, I don't think I understand what this says, and this is just a question. Outside storage of appliances, there, you see that one? Okay. It lists the various things, obviously. Now it says, this does not include freezers or refrigerators that are in use and are not visible from the road or street unless they're in a covered carport. Now that seems to say the opposite of what it might be intended to me. Don't you? If it's not visible from the road or street, it would include those that are in a covered carport. If it's not visible, right? As opposed to exclude them from that exemption? Or,
If it's under a carport or it's not visible.
right.
It can be under a carport and be visible.
Okay. That's what I didn't understand.
As long as it's actually being used as a freezer, right?
Right.
Yeah, I understood that. I just didn't understand where the part about unless they're in a covered carport. Thank you.
And again, if somebody's got a freezer sitting in their carport that ain't working, and we're probably not gonna go up there and check it, you know, it's just.
Well, I would understand not.
It's when it's under the carport and it's got
Yeah.
the lid torn off of it.
I just wanted to understand what that meant. I understand you can't have that.
That all
kind of
comes back
stuff.
to a safety issue. If it's
I
not
was
being
just saying,
used,
safety
or,
issue. If it-
you know, you got your little kids playing, and Junior's gonna take little brother and stick him in the freezer, and then something happens, he runs off and leaves him in there, so.
Or your neighbor comes
Or
over
your
to your
neighbor,
house.
whatever,
you know,
yeah.
yeah.
Kind of the same thing with vehicles on blocks. They're dangerous. Kids can get around and knock that stuff off. I've known it happening to people. I know a guy lost his arm because of that.
This ordinance is, it's kind of a blanket. I mean, we're trying to be so specific, and I think that we are, but that's gonna come down to you, Tim, is how you enforce it. And that's how we have full confidence in you, that you're gonna enforce it and you're gonna be fair. And you're also, it says you're gonna give a warning. You're not just gonna show up and say, okay, this is it, and off to jail you
The
go.
vast majority of the people that call me, they don't want their name mentioned.
Right.
You know, they would never come to a meeting, and, you know, don't say I called in, but can you do something about this? And so the vast majority don't want to be mentioned. And if we had an ordinance that covered every single what if that everybody can think of, it would never end. Well, what if this? Well, what if that? Well, what if? There's no way, any law, any regulation, it always is gonna have that part of discretion, making a judgment call. And I know the argument behind that was, well, what if the guy that comes after me is a tyrant? Well, if he's a tyrant or she's a tyrant, even a perfectly good, everybody agrees with the ordinance, if they're a tyrant, they're going to abuse that. But Dwight did this for 14 years, Philip did it, I'm doing it. You know, if there's a risk of somebody coming in here later, that's why we've got the mayor, that's why we've got the city council. I mean, in anything, you're going to end up in certain situations, you have to use your judgment on it. Even when, you know, we're doing inspections for heat and air, and you're looking at something and you're in a specific situation, you go, okay, here's what the code says. There's no way we can do it exactly like it says, but we know what the intent of this code is. The intent is for safety. We've done all we can, so here's what we're going to do. You got to make a judgment. So no matter what it is, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's code enforcement, somebody's doing 110 in front of Pizza Hut, and they pull them over, and the wife's in the other seat, and she's fixing to have a baby. They're probably not going to say, hold on a minute, I'm going to run your tags. No, they're probably going to give them an escort to the emergency room. You got to make a judgment call. So.
Yeah, and what I like about more specific is with the other ordinance, one of the other ordinances we had, I don't remember which one it was, the second one or the first one. I think it was the first one that ended up being the one that was actually standing, right? It was very ambiguous. I mean, it was just left open to all kinds of interpretation from what I saw, so.
The one that ended up in our code was a mess.
It was a mess.
I mean, Tim and I sat down and tried to understand it, and it contradicted itself 2 or 3 times, and it was just awful.
Yeah.
And so that was what started.
That's probably why I never got
That's
to
what
court.
started.
Because it wasn't,
100%.
you know, like, I don't know what I need to do here.
No, it's
It would
exactly,
be a nightmare in court. wouldn't
yeah,
it?
that's exactly what happened, is that Tim and I sat down and said, okay, you know, 2020, we're gonna talk about code enforcement, and so we sat down and we started going over code together, and I'm like, I don't know what you can do, Tim. And so that's exactly what started this whole process, so.
You have another question, Adam?
Yeah. Don't let me interrupt though. Okay. The glance over this, that looks like a significant improvement in my opinion. But I've had it 10 minutes. However, I'm not clear on the explanation of that, the inoperable and abandoned motor vehicle section of it has gotten increasingly confusing the more that it's explained by various city officials. The reason being, when we first discussed this, Chad explained that this would not be applicable, this section isn't applicable to a vehicle, if I understood correctly, that is parked in a designated parking spot on a residential property. Is that still the standing interpretation?
What are we talking about? We're talking about inoperable vehicles?
Yeah, the inoperable vehicle section. If it's parked in a designated parking area, even on a residential property, then that is zoned for a vehicle to be parked. And that section of the code, we were told several months ago, wouldn't be enforced against a vehicle that was in that location. Did I understand or misunderstand that?
No, I think
before
I think you pretty much captured what we were talking about back in March.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. That being the case, I never understood why we got so hung up on that section. Other than it stood out to some people, some of the regulations, but if it doesn't apply, then I don't see any reason to go to the trouble of manipulating it, you know. But what I'm concerned about is, we say that it doesn't apply, but John is one of our egregious offenses because of his RV, which is parked in a designated parking area on his property that he laid gravel on, and it's a parking spot. And that's what I can't figure out, because
No, it's not, it's in the yard with trees.
It's in the yard.
Yeah, I understand,
From the
there's-
street.
I know where it's parked. What I'm telling you is there's a gravel pad under it, it was a parking
You
area,
see it.
and it's all growed up now. So that's what I can't figure out is, it's in a designated parking area, but it's still in violation of that section of the code, and that's where the contradiction is to me. And I want to understand, and I really do want to understand it, it's not like I'm actually curious.
Well, that's
But I
just-
don't know
that's
how it
just-
is.
Well,
That's just one example, Tim. I think it's probably been a couple of months ago, shared a whole bunch of pictures, colored
Yeah.
pictures.
Yeah.
And most of those were cars that did not have tires on them, or wheels on them, or on blocks, which could be a safety hazard. Let alone, it's just flat out ugly, and if you're living next to that.
Yeah, I got that, but Chad tells us that this section of the code that one would use to eliminate those kinds of nuisances doesn't apply to a vehicle if it's parked in a designated parking area.
But then-
Now,
Am I
under
misunderstanding?
the previous, or what we've got currently.
Yes.
What we got currently,
Yes.
if it's in the area that it's been zoned for parking, then the inoperable vehicle portion didn't apply. Now, what we're talking about doing is something totally different, and it's gonna eliminate all the confusion and everything that went along from that.
Okay, so then tell me what you actually want it to be then, if that's the case.
Well, in this version, if you want to keep your inoperable vehicle, then you just have to put it in an enclosed structure.
Okay.
If you want to keep it, it's got to go in a barn, a garage, a building, something you can close up, and you can keep your inoperable vehicle as long as you want.
Right,
You just can't leave it sitting out in the yard.
okay.
But
As
if you
long
want
as
to
it's
keep
not,
it,
as long as it's not visible then
there you go.
from the street or whatever.
Right, then you can keep it.
And I think the way it was actually worded was that it was to presume to be inoperable if it hadn't been, if it hadn't been moved in 3 days and one or more of the other things applied. Was that not how it
It was
was?
a
That's what we-
presumption, which
yeah.
is always something
And then-
that's an overcome with.
And then it went on Facebook that everybody was gonna have to move their vehicles around every 3 days, and that was not,
That's what I'm trying to get straight now,
Yeah.
because the.
So if you've got a vehicle sitting on blocks in your driveway, he's probably gonna come say something to you about it.
Okay,
It's
so
been there
so it isn't, see, you're telling me two completely opposing things, and that's what I'm trying to reconcile. If a vehicle's sitting in your driveway, Chad told me back in whatever it was, February or March, this section of the code doesn't apply to a vehicle in a designated parking area. So it doesn't matter, that's why we didn't have to
It's
move
not
our
gonna be
vehicle.
presumed to be inoperable if it's just sitting in a parking lot.
And if it's licensed, like we have an older truck that we use just for a farm truck, it's licensed. It might stay in my yard for a week without being moved.
Well,
That's
here's
why
the
we got
deal.
that out of the
You're-
ordinance, like every 3 days.
Yeah.
We removed that.
The deal is you're going through all those criteria that Chad said don't apply to a vehicle in a designated parking area.
I think this is going to solve all that, because when you get into a designated parking area and you want to keep your inoperable vehicle, well, if you say designated area, well then I'm going to spread some gravel
Right.
right over there, and that's a designated,
Right.
or I'm going to put it over there. Basically, it's anywhere you want it to be, and that doesn't work.
That could develop into a problem, especially when you're going around 5 years after
So,
the city's let this
I
go.
think
And
this
everybody's
new-
been parked in the same
Yeah,
spot
this
for
new
5 years.
version solves all of that.
Well, it may.
But under the old version, if your vehicle was parked in the same spot for more than 3 days, and it looks like a vehicle that can be driven, Tim's not gonna come by and look at it. But if it's sitting out there and there's no wheels on it, or if the hood's missing off of it, we can see that part of the engine's gone, or we know it's inoperable, even though it's sitting in the driveway, that would have been under the old ordinance, so this has changed that.
Okay, so what you're telling me is different than what Chad told me. That's what I'm trying to reconcile. Chad said that section of the code wouldn't be applied to vehicles parked in a designated parking area. You're saying certain elements of that section of the code won't be applied, and that's what I'm trying to
I thought you said that it
reconcile.
wasn't gonna be, I thought
It's parked.
it wasn't gonna be presumed to be inoperable if it was sitting in the same
Yeah, under
spot.
the inoperable vehicle provision there.
Yeah.
If you've got it parked in your driveway, and this is what we have currently, and it's parked in your driveway, and this is, and again, like, you get one parking area, so if you've got your cars.
Well, you told us back then that we wouldn't be setting a limit on how many parking areas.
You've got your designated parking
Right.
area. You can't set forth 25 designated parking areas on your property.
Highly unlikely.
Okay, well, okay. So you've got your parking area, and then over in your yard somewhere, you've got a car sitting there that's got trees growing around it and flowers or whatever.
Yes.
That's an inoperable vehicle. That's under the provision, that's what you got here under the inoperable vehicle section. Now, in your driveway, if you've got a vehicle that's nothing more than a hunk of junk, that's just total trash, then some other provisions of the nuisance code are probably gonna be cited. You know, I mean,
Yes.
so it's this moving target of what the vehicle is though. So, but to alleviate the concerns about the 3-day moving situation, that's the parking, that's what takes care of the parking area situation. I'm worried that my vehicle is inoperable because it hasn't moved for 3 days. No, because if you got it parked where it's supposed to be parked, it's not an inoperable vehicle, it doesn't apply. That's the issue. But again, we're probably treading off into angels dancing on the head of a pin territory since we're talking about removing that confusion, because obviously that confused citizens. I mean, I got people that, I can't do this, I'm 6 foot. Obviously, well, my nose is coming out, you know. I had conversations with a lot of people that didn't understand it, people that I've had a lot of long and intelligent conversations with them in the past over things and couldn't wrap their heads around it. So at some point, got to accept, okay, not working. So this is going to fix the confusion there, and it's still going to accomplish the stated goal of getting rid of junk vehicles.
Well, that's why, when you explained what you did back in February, March, whenever that last meeting was, and said this section doesn't apply to vehicles parked in a designated parking area, was the terminology you used.
Yeah.
I said, fine, that sounds good to me. Then I'm not concerned about it, but some people couldn't get past what it said.
Well, look, it never concerned me to the extent it concerned other people, but obviously it terrified people.
Yeah.
I mean, it terrified people. So
Right.
I had people calling me, and I tried to talk them off the ledge. I was like, look, we're not out to make you drive your cars around every time. So,
Right.
but again, at some point you have to accept the fact, obviously it was not written in a way that was clear to the citizens. And so I'll acknowledge that and fix it.
Well, listen, we're not all lawyers and you are, so it probably made sense to you. And when you explained it the way that you did, I didn't have a problem with it. The problem is this, if you want an opinion, you're not obligated to this, but it was not communicated well. It's not your job, didn't mean to look at you. It was not communicated well to the city. And you know how I feel about that. But I think that amended version, in the brief time that I've had to look at it, looks like a significant improvement. I appreciate you taking the time to put it together. And you probably.
And like I said at the previous meeting, I mean, we all know what kind of the vehicles I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not talking about the vehicles that I drive by and there's a flat. And they're, oh, no, that's not, I'm talking
No,
about.
I know what you're talking about.
And the good thing about ordinances, like we said in the beginning, if this doesn't work out, I mean, and you have to change. I mean, as the city grows, I mean, you have to make improvements and situations change, population change, people change, so you got to change with it. And so, there's some other ordinances we got to, we'll have to look at in the future, but
Yeah, I'm glad to have this behind,
baby steps.
because next on the block for me is business licensing.
Well, and to go off on a totally different thing, you brought up the concern last time. And,
Yeah.
and again, we're way outside of workshop on nuisance.
Yeah. Well, I'm fine with it, so.
But anyways, I researched that issue, and that's something that'll be brought up at the next meeting, so.
Anybody have anything else?
I like it short and sweet.
Yeah.
I'll kind of pass around the ordinance. Again, I took my take on it is it'd be better, it's a better idea to fix.
And I think one of the things people get hung up about too, about government. All right, you got federal government, you got state government, you got city government. A lot of people are mad at what the federal government does on a day-to-day basis. But when they pass a law at the federal level, they can't just go back and change it. An ordinance can be changed really easy at a city council meeting. If people get mad and say, hey, we don't like this is going, all you gotta get is one council person and say, hey, we want to pull this ordinance.
Well, this is what I'm proposing.
Have a vote, it's over, it's gone.
If they're gonna make a change.
So
basically
it's not anything like our.
So his took the
So
entire, I
it's
think
not
this
as
is
hard
10
to
pages, right?
fix problems.
His took the entire ordinance. I took the only section that was actually changed.
Oh, this is just
50504, whatever, yeah.
So this is the same, it says the same thing, it's just only
And I did,
adding.
well, let me point out, so. Okay. Yeah. I never liked that language. So definition of inoperable vehicle, where it did say presumption of inoperable vehicle, where it said a vehicle shall be deemed inoperable. I've changed that language to defining what an inoperable vehicle is, and a vehicle is inoperable in these conditions.
If you go and visit a site,
So,
if they
That's on,
have
that's would be
findings,
on this under 504.
how long are you gonna give them to clean that up?
that's where I changed it. Hey, that wasn't his change, that was my change. So,
One of those things where I'll make a judgment call.
Are you doing like 30 days or 60 days or?
well, again, that is not
If
exactly.
it's just their grass, they gotta cut their
Yeah,
grass.
and then we crossed out.
I'm gonna say the next
Struck through, and again, this is not.
3 days, we gotta get this
No, I'm
cut.
not counting.
I understand.
If it's
Yeah,
like
struck
some of the
through those
projects
two places where
we looked at the other day, and the guy's like,
Oh, yeah, that's already.
well, can you give me a couple more days? Well, unless you've got a couple 18-wheelers and 15 people, there's no way you're gonna get this done.
Yeah.
So I may give them, I mean, there have been people I'd give 30 days, because it's gonna take that long for them to clean it up. So it just depends on what it is. But I always give them plenty of time, and then,
They're beginning to clean that up there at the Adams house.
Yeah,
And we have.
they're putting the way out of the little one and start piling
No,
up.
above it now.
Oh, I thought Adam's house?
He lives across from the car wash there.
One thing you might, since you're going to the trouble of putting this out to the council, and I assume to amend it or whatever. Oh, wait a minute, that might not be. Yeah, it is, it's in 50407. 50407 under all these subsections. B5. I don't believe that section 5.20 that's referenced there exists. Does it?
We have there's a separate section within, there's a separate section on condemnation that's not within the nuisance code.
Okay, I thought.
Now,
that-
again, I'm not saying, I've never made a mistake on typos or anything,
No,
but
I-
I believe there's a separate section on condemnations, and I think it's 5.2.
I thought that had all been conjoined, so never mind.
Yeah, it's a separate,
I misunderstood.
there was a mistake on the
Yeah, but
vehicle
you-
section that we got rid of.
That's gone.
Yeah.
Anything else? So we think we're good to do this at the next meeting and amend this ordinance? Everybody's gonna be happy with it, I guess?
I would submit, there's no mercy clause on this, and so
We're not doing it right
go
now.
through 3 readings and,
Can't do it now, it's not a city council.
Yeah.
and the good news about this is it changes the vehicle portion, but the rest of the nuisance ordinance is gonna be unadulterated, and so we can, you know, it's the law, so we're not calling that into question.
All right. If there's nothing else, I entertain a motion to, and a second to adjourn.
I'll say it.
Second.
All those in favor?
Amen.